You are working hard, and you still feel like you are one emergency away from everything falling apart. You budget. You try to save. You tell yourself this month will be different. And then something happens. A bill, a car, a medical cost, a moment of exhaustion, and the little you built quietly disappears again. You are not lazy. I want you to hear that clearly, but I need to tell you something that most people will never say to your face. The reason you still feel unsafe has almost nothing to do with how much you earn. There is a number, $23,417. And when I tell you why that number changes how institutions see you, why it changes the leverage they have over your decisions, why a person who holds that kind of reserve with peace in their chest becomes almost impossible to control, you are going to understand something about money that most people carry to their graves without ever learning. This is not about the number itself. The number is a symbol. It represents a threshold where something inside a person shifts, where panic loosens its grip, where desperation stops making decisions on your behalf. And what almost everyone does the moment they begin to save, the exact moment they start approaching something like this, is precisely what breaks the flow. I will tell you what that is. But first, I need you to stay with me, because I know where you are. You have tried to be responsible. You have cut things. You have skipped things. You have made the spreadsheet, or at least looked at the idea of making the spreadsheet. And somewhere between the looking and the doing, the money found its way out anyway. You earn, and then the bills appear, as if they were waiting. You save a little, and then life charges admission. You deny yourself something small, feel briefly virtuous, and then feel quietly ashamed when the number in your account does not seem to notice your sacrifice. That is not failure. I need you to understand what that actually is. That is a money relationship built entirely inside anxiety, built inside urgency, built inside a fear so old and so familiar that it has started to feel like wisdom. You think you are being disciplined, and sometimes you are. But fear can wear the costume of discipline so perfectly that even the person wearing it cannot tell the difference. You track every dollar because you are afraid of what happens if you stop watching. That is not stewardship. That is surveillance born from terror. And here is what nobody tells you. That energy, that gripping, monitoring, anxious energy, does not protect your money. It trains your nervous system to treat money as a threat. And when money feels like a threat, every decision you make around it becomes a defensive move. And defensive moves rarely build anything lasting. What feels most responsible may be quietly keeping you trapped. There is a way to hold money that creates peace, not just a higher balance. And that difference between holding money in fear and holding it in alignment is the thing that changes everything downstream. The same act, the same amount saved, the same discipline applied. It can bless or burden you, depending entirely on the spirit inside the action. Most people have been told this is superstition. I am here to tell you it is law. I did not learn this from a spreadsheet. I did not learn this from a certification program. I did not learn this from the years I spent managing wealth for people who measured their net worth in 8 figures, though watching how the truly wealthy move money did confirm everything I had already been shown. I learned it first in a room, a quiet room, from someone whose hands moved slowly and whose voice never rose above what was necessary. My first job out of college, I sat inside one of the largest banks in this country. I was young, I was eager. I thought I was about to learn how money really worked. And I did learn something, but not what I expected. I learned how the system was designed to function when the person across from it was afraid. I watched how institutions extended themselves toward the frightened, the desperate, the urgent, and how their posture changed, subtly, when someone sat down who did not need anything immediately, who was not rushing, who was not hoping the loan officer liked them enough to overlook the thing in their file. That calm person, that patient person, the one who could wait. They were treated differently, not always openly, but differently. I filed that away. It took me years to understand why. The system is not designed against you, but it is calibrated toward the anxious. It offers relief to people in motion, people who feel they cannot stop, people who borrow to breathe. And there is an entire economy built around that particular kind of person. When I left that job, I spent the next decades on the other side of those tables. Eventually, I sat with people whose wealth was so large that entire teams were required to manage it. And across all of it, the modest and the massive, the pattern was always the same. The ones who held money in peace made different decisions, not always bigger decisions, cleaner ones. But that is not where this teaching begins. It begins earlier than any bank, earlier than any career. It begins with my grandfather. There was an evening. I could not have been older than 9 or 10. The kitchen held that particular quality of light that only exists late on a weekday, when the day's noise has settled and the room feels like it belongs to whoever stayed awake. He was at the table. The kind of table that has seen enough meals to feel like a member of the family. In front of him was an envelope, plain, not ceremonial, the kind you would use to mail a letter or hold a grocery receipt. But he was handling it as if it contained something that required his full attention. He was not counting the money frantically. He was not rushing. He was setting something aside, before anything else, before what was owed, before what was needed, before what was wanted. He was directing a portion with intention. I asked him what he was doing. He looked at me with the patience of someone who has answered a version of this question his whole life. He said, "Money moves toward where it is welcomed and directed. If it enters a frightened house, it behaves like a frightened guest. It does not stay. It does not settle. It passes through." I did not understand that fully. I was 9. But the image stayed in me. The slowness of his hands, the absence of urgency, the way he seemed to be communicating something to the money itself about what kind of home it had arrived in. The first act was not consumption. The first act was alignment. And I would spend years watching wealthy families, sitting inside banking institutions, studying the ones who built quietly versus the ones who exploded and contracted, learning that his insight was not sentiment, it was law. The problem is that nobody teaches this law. What they teach instead is mechanics. Earn more, cut more, invest faster, optimize harder, hustle until the numbers shift. And there is nothing wrong with mechanics, but mechanics without inner alignment is like learning to drive while your vision is distorted. You can master every technical aspect of the vehicle, you can know the roads, you can do everything correctly at the level of procedure, and still end up somewhere you did not intend to go, because the map inside you was drawn by fear. The mainstream advice is not evil, it is just incomplete. It teaches the nervous system to worship accumulation, to measure safety by the number, to treat more as the destination, rather than recognizing that more, arriving into anxiety, simply becomes anxious more. It ignores intention. It ignores timing. It ignores what generosity does to the spirit of a household. It ignores what the word enough actually means when spoken without shame. It ignores the inner meaning of provision. And so you follow the advice. You implement the mechanics. You budget and earn and optimize, and still feel like something essential is missing, like a door that is unlocked but somehow will not open, because you are pushing when the law requires you to pull. Your real problem is not your income. It is not your discipline. It is not even your circumstances, though those are real, and I do not dismiss them. Your real problem is a fractured relationship with something older than interest rates. It is a broken relationship with trust, with release, with peace, with the idea that provision can be ordered rather than only chased. And when I show you the sequence, the actual order, you will understand why so many people save money faithfully and still remain spiritually bound. Why the number grows and the fear does not leave. Why the account improves and the sleep does not. That answer is ahead. The hidden law is this: money stays where fear stops ruling. Not because of magic, not because of superstition, but because a person who no longer treats money as their savior, their enemy, or their proof of worth, makes fundamentally different decisions than someone who does. Their decisions are cleaner. Their judgment is steadier. They see opportunities that the anxious person cannot see, because the anxious person is too busy managing their fear to notice what is available. That is what $23,417 represents in this teaching. Not a magic number, not a threshold that unlocks some secret benefit, but a point, a symbolic, felt point, where the constant urgency begins to loosen, where you stop making decisions from desperation, where you have enough breathing room that the next emergency does not automatically become a crisis of identity, enough to slow the panic, enough to restore the feeling of choice, enough to make you harder to pressure, harder to manipulate, harder to move impulsively toward bad debt, bad work, bad decisions made at 2 in the morning when fear is loudest. Institutions built around urgency lose their leverage over a person who is no longer urgent. That is what they fear, not your balance, your stillness. But here is the warning I must give you before the method, because I have watched this happen too many times in too many households to leave it unsaid. Most people who begin to build a reserve corrupt it almost immediately, not through bad luck, through wrong inner posture. They reach a small threshold of safety and either collapse into relief spending, or they begin to grip the reserve with a new kind of fear, the fear of losing what they have just built. And that second fear is sometimes worse than the first, because it wears the disguise of wisdom. The law can be practiced before the full number is reached. The posture comes first. The number follows the posture. Let me give you the sequence. The first step is to receive without panic. When money enters, a paycheck, a transfer, a gift, an unexpected return, do not react from the gut. Do not spend from the relief of receiving. Do not immediately begin calculating what is owed and subtract down to 0 before the money has even settled. Pause. Even if the pause is 30 seconds, even if the pause is a breath and a moment of quiet acknowledgement. Create a space between receiving and reacting. This sounds simple. It is not simple, because most of us were trained to treat incoming money as a problem to be immediately solved, as something that does not belong to us yet, that must be distributed and depleted before something goes wrong. That reflex is fear, and you must interrupt it. The second step is to set apart a first portion with intention, before the bills, before the obligations, before anything else. Not as superstition, not as a transaction designed to force a result, but as a declaration, a statement made through action that says, "Money is not my God. I am not desperate. I direct this from a place of order, not terror." That portion serves generosity. It serves blessing. It serves whatever expression of giving aligns with your conscience and your covenant. But the act of setting it apart first, before yourself, before your needs, rewires something in the spirit of the household around money. My grandfather knew this. He practiced it without announcement. The third step is to build the protected reserve, not for image, not to feel superior to anyone, not to display. The reserve is a covenant with peace. It is built quietly, added to consistently, and treated with a seriousness that is almost sacred. It is not touched for ordinary inconvenience. It exists to remove you from the class of people whose only option is urgency. The fourth step is to name the reserve correctly, inside yourself, in how you think about it. Not my escape fund, not my proof that I made it, not the thing that will finally make me feel safe. Those names are still fear. They still locate your security inside the number rather than inside your alignment. Call it your breathing room, your quiet place, your non-fear. Call it the thing that allows you to say no when no is the right answer, and yes when yes is the right answer, without your nervous system making the decision before your wisdom can. The fifth step is to spend from clarity, not from emotional weather. Not from the temporary relief of a good week, not from the guilt of a hard month, not from the pressure of what others appear to have, not from the panic of a moment that feels like emergency, but is actually only discomfort. Spend from stillness, from decision, from alignment with where you are actually going. This is the sequence. Receive without panic. Set apart first. Build the reserve. Name it rightly. spend from clarity. It is the same order, practiced consistently, that transforms the spirit around money in a household. And yet, there is something that corrupts this sequence. Something invisible that can make a person follow every outward step perfectly and still leak everything they are trying to build. It is motive. Greed corrupts the method first. When generosity is practiced only to force a return, when you give because you are running a transaction with the universe and expecting your deposit back with interest, the giving is hollow. The spiritual weight of the act evaporates. You have performed the action and preserved the fear beneath it. Ego corrupts it second. When the reserve is built to feel superior, to have something to announce, to finally feel like you have won a comparison you have been running in your mind for years. That reserve becomes a monument to the old, frightened self, dressed up as success. Desperation corrupts it third. When every move is made from terror rather than trust, when the giving is frantic, the saving is white-knuckled, and the peace never actually arrives because you never believed it was possible in the first place. Regret corrupts it fourth. Grieving every dollar released, tracking every act of generosity like a loss, treating the reserve as something to protect from life rather than something that enables you to engage life without panic. Public display corrupts it fifth, turning your discipline into a performance, letting your practice become something you manage for an audience, which means you are managing their perception rather than cultivating your own alignment. And then the quietest corruption of all, secret self-hatred. The belief, buried beneath the behavior, that you are not actually someone who keeps what they build, that this, like everything before, will eventually dissolve. And so the actions are half-hearted, the commitment is performative, and the money finds its way out through the gap between what you do and what you believe about yourself. The heart can cancel what the hands appear to do correctly. That is why this is not a mechanical system. That is why the sequence matters less than the spirit that moves through the sequence. Fear disguised as wisdom is still fear. Now let me tell you why this actually works. Not at the level of behavior, but at the deeper level. The level my grandfather understood without the language to name it academically. When you are no longer gripping money from fear, your decisions become cleaner. You stop making the small daily leakages that come from impulse, from compensation, from proving something, from managing your anxiety through spending. When your decisions become cleaner, the leakage slows. When leakage slows, capacity grows. Not dramatically at first, but steadily, in the quiet way that compound order works. When capacity grows, you begin to recognize opportunities that were always present, but invisible to the panicked eye. Opportunities in relationships, in timing, in the simple clarity of a mind that is not constantly managing crisis. When generosity and reserve coexist, when you are both releasing and building, both open-handed and ordered, you become a trustworthy vessel. And trustworthy vessels receive greater stewardship, not as a magic reward, but because readiness and calm and order create the conditions where greater things can be received without being immediately destroyed. Blessing in this teaching is not a lightning strike. It is not a lottery. It is not a supernatural override of consequence. Blessing is increased clarity, fewer self-created emergencies, reduced compulsion, cleaner relationships with giving, receiving, and holding. The quiet sense that you are operating in alignment with something larger than the next bill cycle. The aligned person does not attract money through wishful thinking. They attract it the way order attracts function, the way readiness attracts opportunity, the way peace attracts the kind of thinking that notices what the frightened mind scrolls past. It is resonance. It is moral weight. It is the accumulated effect of 1,000 small decisions made from clarity rather than panic. This is what my grandfather's hands were doing at that table. He was not performing a ritual. He was practicing an orientation. And over decades, that orientation shaped everything around him. His decisions, his relationships, his reputation, his peace. Which means the shift I am asking you to make is not primarily about the money. It is about who you are becoming in relationship to money. You are no longer the person chased by bills, gripping every dollar like oxygen, asking money to tell you whether you matter. That identity served you once. It kept you alert in a world that required alertness, but you have outgrown it. And if you carry it forward, it will corrupt everything you try to build. The new name for who you are is this: steward, channel, keeper of peace, guardian of what gets passed forward. The reserve you are building is not just a number, it is emotional stillness. It is the time to say no when no is right. It is the room to obey wisdom over urgency. It is the space between an offer and your answer, where a frightened person used to live permanently. The true wealth shift is identity before arithmetic. If you keep the old frightened identity, you will misuse the new money. You will spend it on proof. You will hide it in ego. You will grip it until it grows heavy and strange in your hands. But if you let the identity shift first, if you begin to move through money as a steward rather than a survivor, then the number will follow in its own time, and it will mean something different when it arrives. I have heard from people who walked this path quietly, people who stopped the panic spending, not through willpower alone, but through practicing the posture first, and who found within months that they were sleeping differently, that the 3 a.m. calculations stopped waking them, not because the numbers had transformed, but because their relationship to the numbers had. People who began setting aside the first portion intentionally, not as a transaction, not demanding a return, but as a genuine declaration of order, and who found that the generosity began to change something in how they received. As if the act of releasing with trust created a different quality of space for what came next. Families who built reserve without making it an idol, who treated it as breathing room rather than proof of worth, and who found that peace returned to the household before the wealth visibly expanded. That the arguments around money softened, that the decisions became more aligned, that the children were watching and absorbing a different pattern. Some saw business clarity they had not had before. Some found that fewer self-created emergencies appeared. Some found that opportunities they had previously ignored or dismissed suddenly became visible and viable. None of this is a guarantee. This is not a mechanical trade. You cannot give in order to force a return and expect the law to honor the transaction. It does not work that way. But for those who practice it with clean intention, the first sign of abundance almost always arrives not as a number, but as peace. A quietness where the fear used to be. A steadiness that begins to look from the outside like confidence, and from the inside like finally coming home to a way of relating to your own life that was always supposed to be available to you. This transmission today is a beginning. There are deeper layers around sacred timing, around the agreements a household must reach before money can settle, around what you should not speak too early and what you must speak clearly. Those teachings are ahead for those who want to go further. But what you have received today is enough to begin. So let me close with what I most want you to carry forward. Money must not be clutched like a god. Reserve must be built in peace. Generosity must remain clean of manipulation. Fear must not govern the hand that gives or the hand that saves. You are building something that will outlast the next bill cycle, something that will outlast this year. If you practice this faithfully, with clean intention and honest posture, you are building a pattern that reaches beyond your wallet, into your home, into your children, into the way the next generation learns to move through their own financial lives without the exhaustion that has marked so many of ours. The true opposite of poverty is not luxury, it is peace, with ordered provision, with enough breathing room that wisdom governs your choices instead of urgency, with a reserve that is not worshipped but wisely held, with generosity that flows from trust instead of calculation. That is the inheritance worth building. May your finances carry peace rather than panic. May your decisions carry wisdom rather than urgency. May your home become a place where money is handled with dignity and direction. May your hands be disciplined and your heart remain clean. And may what you build here become the pattern your children and their children inherit. Not just the money, but the orientation, the posture, the non-fear. If this teaching has spoken to something old in you, something that recognized this even before you could name it, then stay close. Write in the comments the words, "I am building in peace." Let that be your declaration. Let that be how you mark the beginning of a different relationship with everything money has meant in your life up to today. There are deeper teachings ahead for those who are ready to receive them. This is only the first door.